Spiritual Direction from Dante, Avoiding the Inferno, a book by Father Paul Pearson of the Oratory. Canto 29. Topics: Hardness of heart is easy, family bonds and family feuds, the trust that binds together society, lack of empathy and lack of manners. When we contemplate the infinite mercy of God, we should be filled with hope that reaching the promised reward of heaven is possible. Our many sins and failures will not stand in the way of God's forgiveness. And the hope we have for our own salvation is a hope we extend to each and every human soul. May God's mercy touch them and move them to conversion. But God's openness to us and our openness to Him are two different things. Religion is often ridiculed, and God is either ignored or rejected as a crutch for feeble minds. Perhaps the hardness we've all observed, and probably felt at times in our own hearts, makes our Lord's warning more comprehensible. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 13, he says, "Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter it are many." In line 1, Dante is moved to tears, and he says, "I long to stay a little while and weep." Were we wrong in saying that disgust, rather than sympathy, was his reaction to this ditch of sinners? Virgil notices and questions him, and these displays of sorrow have no place when seeing the just punishment of the damned. Virgil has corrected Dante's sentimentality before, and he thought that issue had been resolved. Even though we have descended so far into the pit of hell, the circumference, smaller in each circle, is still at 22 miles wide here. Unfortunately, hell needs to be so vast as this to accommodate all those who refuse happiness. Family strife has an impressive staying power. It is a frequent but unfortunate part of our inheritance that we grow up with divisions and controversies as a normal part of life. There are people to whom we do not speak, or businesses we do not patronize. Families have long memories, and maintaining peace and connection within our family and with our neighbors is a beautiful and valuable heirloom to pass on to our descendants. In line 13, Dante thinks that Virgil doesn't understand him, and he says, "If you had paid attention to the cause, you might have granted me a longer pause." He thinks he's being corrected again for having sympathy for the damned. But that isn't the issue here. Dante explains his tears. Among the damned souls, he spotted a relative of his, Jerry del Bolo. But Virgil already knows and understands. He noticed more than Dante thought he did. He saw the soul pointing Dante out to the others and uttering threats. Del Bolo is upset because his relative Dante has not avenged him. Dante is struggling with his own anger and resentment at what he considers the unjust fate of his family and the exile he currently endures. The threats of his relative are the last straw. Virgil advises him to forget all about him. Injustice can be addressed, but vengeance, so much a part of Italian society then, and sadly still with us today, is not the way. Del Bolo is a personal witness to that, even though his words say to the contrary. We can see in him where the code of honors got him. Vengeance is not the road to justice, but to hell. Dante sees that if he yields to his thoughts of revenge, he could very well join Jerry right in this pit. He could become an instrument of the division he's witnessed so graphically. Dante weeps in part because of the sorrow of seeing his own relative suffer, and partly from the frustration that bearing injustice has laid upon his spirit, but also in part, at least we can hope, because he sees the horrible destination at the end of the road he himself has been traveling. We can see these different motives for tears in Dante's words to Virgil, when he says, "I think a spirit of my own blood mourns the wickedness that down there costs so much." Virgil's subjective eyes sees so much more than Dante, overwhelmed as he is with his own emotional reactions to what he sees. When we are struggling under intense emotions, we focus so much on the source of our struggle that we develop a sort of tunnel vision. We don't see things we would otherwise notice, and we misinterpret what we do see. Dante is so overwhelmed by Bertrand of Born that he doesn't notice Jerry at first. And in the midst of that turmoil, he misinterprets Virgil's words to him. This is a lesson in our own need for an objective eye when we're fighting against strong emotions. We need someone to listen, not in order to agree with us, but in order to correct our perspective, as Virgil does for Dante here. This might be a spiritual director or even a wise friend, someone to see what we don't. In line 39, again, darkness is the first thing we notice about this final Malebolgia. Darkness and fraud naturally go together. This will not end up being the main image associated with this sin, but it is the first to come to Dante's attention. It is, in a way, the genus or general category of fraud. Later, we will encounter the image that sets this sin apart from other sins of fraud. Dante struggles not to be drawn into sympathy for the damned souls. Their cries, like the siren song we heard about in Ulysses' account of the sea voyage, are overwhelming, resisted only by blocking his ears. Ulysses had to lash himself to the mast to keep from being drawn in by the siren's song. A body begins to rot when the parts that used to work as a unity begin to fall apart. They decompose. The same thing happens in society. When the bonds that hold us together no longer function, communities fall apart. They rot. When we smell the rot in our own world, we must remember that only true connection will counteract this decomposition. In the final ditch of this circle, the dominant, defining, and even overwhelming image is the stench. The souls smell like they're rotting. The line in line 51 says, as comes from members dying of the rot. What sin could this smell of decay signify? Strangely enough, in this deepest ditch of the circle of simple fraud, we come across something that might seem petty, at least compared with what we have already seen, counterfeiting or falsifying. But as we've learned several times, Dante, and God too, Dante would want us to know, takes sins against property very seriously, since personal property is our means of personal sustenance and a guarantee of some measure of freedom in our lives. For reasons we shall see, counterfeiting is worse than all the other sins against property we have seen punished higher up in hell. Again, the smell is a major image. The air is so pestilential that it would make any living thing drop dead. The sin we are about to encounter not only stinks, but this stink has the power to wipe out life as we know it. It undermines everything. It is the smell of the death of society. We are given another clue in line 67 to the true nature of this sin. The souls are sprawled out without regard for one another. It is as though they don't even recognize one another's presence. Here, we see an outward sign of the ultimate breakdown in human solidarity in society. Living in one another's physical presence, but entirely isolated from any meaningful interaction. To complete the imagery in a modern way, perhaps the souls should be listening to iPods or spending time on their iPhone. Modern cities can be disturbingly like this final ditch, with people traveling together on a mass transit without even making eye contact, let alone anything like conversation. As a final clue, and to complete the imagery of decay, the skin of these souls is covered with scabs. They're breaking down, and as they scratch themselves, little bits and pieces of themselves go flying as when a fisherman scales a large fish. Perhaps these also symbolize the way these counterfeiters alienated the property of others. Some have suggested that the scales they scatter look like coins and are as valuable as the debased money they brought into circulation. Once we feel unconnected with people around us and our empathy is gone, quickly the outward show of connection disappears. Simple manners are an embodiment of connection. And without human connection, there are no manners. Without manners, Society must produce detailed rules for everything. The good works that might flow naturally from being connected with others are now considered foreign and quaint. In a proper world, who would need a sign to tell them to give up his seat for an elderly or handicapped person? Such things should not even need to be said, but we now find a need to say them, and that is a very bad sign in itself. In line 85, Virgil speaks to the sinners with a sort of dismissive sarcasm. Even when they answer his questions, he responds by wishing them eternal fingernails that will allow them to scratch forever. All the souls who hear that Virgil is guiding the living Dante through hell immediately react to him, turning towards him and trembling. What is the cause of this reaction? They seemed lost in their own little worlds until Dante and Virgil appeared. Their physical presence wasn't enough to excite their interest. It is only when Virgil explains the mission he is on that they snap to attention. And Dante takes up Virgil's tone and says, "Don't let your tedious and repulsive pains get in the way of telling me who you are." Why the scorn? Gruffalino was a famous alchemist. The story he tells about his execution for suspicion of heresy does not account for his being here in hell. After clearing his name regarding the heresy, he admits that alchemy is the reason for his damnation. The focus of most alchemists was turning lead into gold, a tempting project since lead was inexpensive and yet so similar to gold in its properties as we saw in the circle of the hypocrites. The chemicals used in their attempts to bring about this very profitable transformation has often caused horrible skin irritations. And these chemicals are perhaps part of the reason for the leprosy-like disease from which they suffer. In line 139, Gruffalino says, "How fine an ape of nature's works I was." By counterfeiting and doing a respectably good job about it, these souls were able to pass off their fake coins for the real thing. This flood of fake money undermined not only the economy of the cities, but even more importantly, the trust between citizens needed in society. When the means of exchange, money, is called into question, how can normal trade and transactions continue? When currencies crash, people can't buy what they need with the pay they received for their labor. When people won't accept money because it might be fake, the money we have becomes useless for providing for our needs. That makes the labor that earned the money useless also. We've worked for nothing. Those who receive a fake coin and pass it on unknowingly end up being implicated in fraud themselves. We depend upon one another in a complex society for the necessities of life. We are not self-sufficient farmers producing everything we consume. We work, get paid, and use our wages to buy what we ourselves do not produce. This specialization is an important prerequisite for culture and our freedom to give our energies to things which are not strictly essential. But how can we get what we need if no one trusts the money we try to use to buy it? Without a stable economy, which requires a stable currency, human society breaks down and the fabric of our daily life unravels, and civilization decays. Canto 30. Topics. Individuality is God's gift, not our decision. Sin as the ultimate reality show. The modern world treats an individual's identity as though it were something fluid, a matter of design or choice. Who we are as a person is supposedly a blank slate upon which we can inscribe whatever we desire. But the Church teaches us that we do not construct our identities, we discover them. Our task in the spiritual life is to purify and strengthen who we are. When a raw jewel is mined, it looks to the untrained observer much like other jewels. Only when it is cleaned up does its nature begin to show itself. But its full beauty is revealed only when the jewel is cut and faceted. Then it begins to sparkle with its greatest glory. The process of growing in holiness is not a matter of forcing individuals into a preset mold, eliminating everything that makes them distinct. Holiness respects individuality completely. Others might try to steal our identity, but God never will. Our individuality is a gift to us. We are the ones most likely to reject that individuality by constructing a false self. In line 4, we are now about to meet a new group of sinners in this final ditch of the circle of the fraudulent. Falsifiers of a different sort. Imposters. Counterfeiters of human identity. Although thieves were said to steal their victim's identity by taking their property, imposters take the identity itself. After meeting the falsifiers of money, we are presented with the image of King Athamas, and then Queen Hecuba of Troy. The king becomes so crazed that he forgets his own identity, killing one of his sons and causing the death of the other and their mother. It is not merely the brutality of his attack that is important here. In the line at 20 and 21, it says, Hecuba loses her mind, howling like a dog, so badly her grief was twisted in her mind. This being beside oneself is the real point. It is another example of Dante introducing a topic indirectly, through the imagery employed. Perhaps the trembling that Dante and Virgil noticed was arising from the dog-eat-dog atmosphere of the circle. There is a tone of madness, of the breakdown of rationality and civility. Who can be peaceful or even fully human living like that? Gianni Schicchi, a clever impostor, attacks his fellow sinners like a wild boar. His viciousness, as described by Dante, is starkly contrasted with Puccini's gentle treatment of the same character in his opera, Gianni Schicchi. Puccini treats Schicchi's story as a comedy of mistaken identity, a man who impersonates another in order to falsify a will, but all for a good cause, for the financial well-being of a pair of young lovers. We're meant to see Gianni as a clever sneak, a sort of rule breaker who isn't entirely to be trusted, but whom you might like to have on your side in a tricky situation. Dante obviously views it in more serious of a way, placing Schicchi deep in hell. The breakdown of society caused by the breakdown in trust through counterfeiting and impersonation results in the suppression of what is truly human and leaves behind only the bestial drives to rule. A sort of Darwinian survival of the fittest. Human society is not supposed to be nature red in tooth and claw, but the dissolution of trust can quickly make it just that. Schicchi is, in Dante's view, the embodiment of that descent to the level of the beast. In line 37, notice that Mira is also an adulteress, but she is punished as a counterfeiter, not as an adulteress. The deception, which is a perversion of her uniquely human power of reason, is more corruptive of human good than the disordered sexuality she displays. Again, we are reminded that according to Dante, a sin is greater which produces a greater harm, not to our neighborhood or to God, which really isn't possible anyway, since God cannot be harmed or even changed, but to our own human nature. We offend God by destroying that creature made in his image, a creature whom he loves, ourselves. That is why sins of reason are graver than sins of passion, because they corrupt something more fundamental in us, something at the very core of what it means to be human. And from another point of view, reason can work to bring disordered passions back into order. So long as we have reason, we have the possibility of reform. But once reason is disordered, what can put it back on track? To use a scriptural image, Matthew 5:13 says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored?" We are intended to be creatures guided by right reason. Reason is our salt. Even more than our private material goods, our personal identity and appearance belong to us. They are our property. So one who impersonates is therefore a thief. Compare these sinners with the thieves in the Cantos 24 and 25, whose identities are stolen from them since they did not respect what belonged to others. In line 52, the man's dropsy distorts his limbs, making him almost unrecognizable. His true identity is obscured. He's trapped in a body that barely seems his own, entombed in flesh. Master Adam was a counterfeiter who debased the pure gold florin for profit. It seems fitting that his punishment involves a terrible thirst, like the rich man in the gospel parable. He thirsted after the wrong things in life, and now he thirsts continually and will never be satisfied. Imagining what he cannot have only increases Master Adam's pain. In line 67, it says, "The rushing water of the streams are ever before me," tantalizing him with an object beyond his reach. The desire of his eyes for what wasn't really his was the cause of his sin in the world and continues to increase his suffering even now. In line 76, Master Adam longs to see his fellow sinners condemned. One has been already. But he could not go to see them in their misery, for his limbs were bound. If he could drag himself an inch a century to see them suffer, he certainly would. He'd even willingly trade the opportunity to drink at a fountain in order to see them suffer. No fellow feeling or empathy is left, no desire for their conversion or hope that they might escape a fate so cruel as his own. In this, he is different from the rich man in the gospel parable who was surprised to find himself in hell. That man wanted a messenger to go back to earth to warn his brothers, so that they wouldn't suffer the same fate as he. There is a strange and rather sleazy delight we take in observing other people, and especially when they are acting badly. Reality shows and live streaming help feed this fascination for the modern world, but it has always been around. In the past, it was gossip columns and peep shows, but this delight was the same, looking from an unseen viewing post at something that should have been private. It is the thrill of the voyeur, the peeping Tom. It grabs our attention and holds on to it. We are mesmerized by what we see, almost addicted to it. But what does it do to us? Our imaginations are filled with salacious images. We have become people who watch life rather than people who live it. In line 94, two sinners who have been there since Master Adam arrived, but without moving, are steaming and stinking with pestilential fever. When Adam identifies them and their crimes, one, Sinon of Troy, arises from his feverish stupor and attacks him. The violence becomes reciprocal in both physical and verbal. Their exchange fascinates in an illicit sort of way, like watching some talk shows on daytime television. The key imagery here is the total breakdown of human connection. This decay of the bonds that united one human being with another is the direct result of the failure of trust brought about by this falsification these sinners have committed. What they experience here in hell is what they helped bring about in their own societies while on earth. Dante succumbs to the fascination of this sparring match with a sort of prurient interest. Virgil quickly reprimands him and says, "You keep looking there, and in a while, I'll pick a fight with you." Dante is immediately stunned by the anger in Virgil's voice, and Virgil is deadly serious about what he is saying. He casts aside Dante's embarrassment, assuring him that his contrition itself is enough to remove his guilt. But he leaves him with this stern reminder that is even more fitting in our own age, with the media so ready to supply the information and the pictures to satisfy all of our vain curiosity. To want to hear it is a base desire. Curiosity is not the same as the noble desire for the truth. Dante came to hell to learn about the sins that condemn people to an eternity of suffering. He's here precisely in order to gather information about hell, information intended to help him change his life. But Dante had already learned what he needed to know in this ditch without indulging in the juicy details of this verbal battle. And how often we allow that base desire to rule in our conversations, wanting to know what we have no business knowing, knowledge that contributes to nothing but our own inflated sense of our own self-importance, placing ourselves at the judge's bench, the arbiter, in Virgil's words, viewing the mess of people's lives, their weakness and their failures from atop our pedestal of supposed objectivity.